All right, welcome everybody. Just coming in, we've got a poll up that you can take. Just want to understand kind of where you're at. It always helps us to frame the conversation. And Maggie and I are just kind of hanging out, talking about AI products that we actually like to use. So, yeah, as you're coming in, do it. And Maggie, you were talking about Gong. Is it that you AI product that you really enjoy using?
Yeah. Yeah, I think Gong is a sleeper hit. It's something that our sales team brought in, obviously to help them with their teams, but it's something that our product team has started to use just because we can search for features and feedback
Yeah.
way more quickly, and we don't have to go through the scheduling a meeting and trying to find someone to give us feedback. We can just hear it live when it's happening naturally. So that's been a pretty cool one for us.
And it does it again, if you're just joining us, go ahead and take the poll. And Maggie and I are just talking about some AI products that we use. So Gong was the one she mentioned. Does it integrate directly with your other key technology pieces? I mean, you were saying it enables almost like enterprise level search of transcriptions and content.
Um, Not really. I mean, I just log into Gong when I'm looking for feedback on a given thing.
Okay.
But it's just a AI powered tool that I think is unexpected, had an
Yeah.
unexpected impact on our workflow because it wasn't built for us
Yeah.
necessarily. So I think that's been pretty interesting.
That's cool. What was you'd mentioned Otter? I mean, I think a lot of people are probably familiar with Otter because it's the
Mm-hmm.
transcribing service within Zoom. If
Yep.
you didn't know that, that's how Zoom does their transcription is actually through that third party. Do you use it differently or outside of Zoom?
No, it's really for that. I
Okay.
think it's been useful for, especially for meetings that you can't attend for whatever reason, just getting a quick transcript from someone.
Hmm.
That's been pretty useful. Especially, again, a lot of what I do in product is customer feedback, listening to perspectives. Maybe some executives are having a chat about something and just getting a transcript has been pretty valuable.
Cool.
What are
So again,
you,
if
what
you're
are your tools?
yeah, if you're just joining us, Megan and I are talking about favorite AI tools. So if you've got some, throw them in the chat. If you've got a favorite that you're using, we'd love to hear your favorite tools right now. So we've got one for SaneBox, Aki, SaneBox. Interesting. I don't know SaneBox. Aki, hit
Me
me up.
neither.
What does SaneBox do? I'd be interested to hear more about that one. Email filtering. See, that's email, such a fascinating one. People overlook that, like the original application of
Yeah.
AI in marketing, sales, business was spam filtering, like this whole idea, and then just over time gets smarter in predicting what emails matter and things like that. And some of us just take that feature for granted within Gmail, but
Mm-hmm.
that's such a cool one. Yeah, if anybody else has any cool AI text that they're using, we've got Lumen 5 for video creation from Jeff. I haven't seen that one. That's pretty cool. Yeah, if you've got any other ones, go ahead and throw them in the chat. We're using a lot Pattern 89 right now. It came out of High Alpha. I don't know if you know those guys, the venture studio in Indianapolis.
Mm-mm.
So what it does is you upload variations of your ad creative and it runs predictive models to tell you which is going to be most effective. So you don't have to spend $1 and it finds you the winner and then you run that winning ad as your creative.
Oh,
So
cool.
yeah, it's pretty slick. So that's one. We've got Crisp.ai. That's another one. What's Crisp do, Aki? That's another one. I love Aki. Aki's like, if you don't know Aki, he's one of the founders of MarketingEye, which is actually another one of the tools we use a ton. Filters background noise. Do I have background noise, Aki? Is that what made you think of that? But I mean, Aki's just brilliant, and he's always got like awesome tools that he's looking at. So yeah, Market Muse is another we actually use for content strategy. So it finds gaps in your content, looks for things and predicts which pieces of content you've previously published actually have a probability of having greater success with if you
Mm-hmm.
enrich them. And then it recommends what questions to answer within it to enrich it. And then it actually, they're moving into some of the NLG space where it can develop first drafts of blog posts based on
Oh,
creative
wow.
prompts.
That's
Yeah.
cool.
So yeah, so we're just coming up on that. We'll give it another minute as people are coming in. We had over 500 people registered for this, so it should be a good turnout today. We've got the poll going on, so if you take a moment and answer that poll, so we're 55% right now, beginner, 47% intermediate, which pretty well aligned with the findings actually of the report.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the chat, if you've got some favorite AI tools that you're using, we'd love to hear those. What is the AI tech for content mapping? Market Muse, I think, is the one I was just mentioning there. That helps you with that. And that's a hot space. Like you'll actually see in the key findings, the number one is actually content recommendation engines, the number one use case that people are interested in. but we see a ton of interest around AI tools for content. All right, well, we're a minute in, so why don't we go ahead? I know we still got people coming in. We've got the poll going. I'll leave that up for another minute as people are coming in, and we're welcoming them just to see where we land there. Yeah, and Mike from our team is throwing in some links to some of the tools that people were mentioning here too. So, all right, well, let's go ahead and get started. This is actually my first time using Google Slides to present. So hopefully this runs really smoothly.
Doing great so far.
So far, so good. I made it in one slide in, Maggie. We're in good shape. All right. So I'm going to just kind of introduce you to this series. If this is the first time you're joining us, the MarketingEye Institute, we do 1 or 2 webinars a month, just bring in experts on topics, entrepreneurs, product leaders within tech companies, authors, just trying to bring perspective to these different technologies and different ways you can be using AI. There's actually another great on-demand one from Drift with Kyle that you and I were talking about, Kyle, Maggie.
Mm-hmm.
So he's got a great on-demand webinar in here with Mark Killens. So yeah, you can go to this page, the Marketing AI webinars at the bit.ly link there, and that'll give you an archive. We've probably got about 12 to 15 webinars that are available free on demand that you can check out. So I'm going to go ahead and end this poll, and let's go ahead and share the results. So as we're kind of getting into this, 54% beginner. So again, we're asking, your level of understanding and terminology and capabilities. 54% beginner, 44% intermediate, 6% advanced. So that's kind of around where I would expect. We'll show you how that compares to the report itself, because we asked that same question within the study, if you haven't seen it. But in that, it was 50% beginner and I think 37% intermediate. And Maggie and I will talk a little bit about, do we think that people are being true to themselves in answering that question as we get a little further into this. But yeah, let me do introductions. So Maggie is Director of Product Management at Drift. And as I learned last night, I can't believe I didn't know this, a Olympic speed skater. Is that right?
That is correct.
Little fun
Yes.
fact. You want
Fun
to just
fact.
kind of give us your background?
Yeah. I mean, obviously started in sports, but as much as I wanted, you can't necessarily make a great career in speed skating. So went into regular careers, and I've been in product for a long time. Been at Drift for about 3 years since we were early stage. So it's been a really interesting ride, and I'm super excited to share what we've been learning about AI along the way.
Yeah, and so the cool thing here is going to be, obviously we teamed up with Drift to do this data marketing AI research. So not only are they, kind of a partner of ours here, but Maggie brings the perspective of a product manager within a company that's building AI. She talks to customers that are looking for AI or looking for smarter solutions all the time. And she works with the internal team to try and figure out what to build. So I think she just has a ton of really interesting perspectives that as we're kind of going through these findings, she'll be able to offer. And then myself, if you're not familiar, I'm the founder of MarketingEye Institute. I also own an agency, PR 2020, that some people may be familiar with. Started the Institute as a blog in 2016. And I'm just kind of jumping into the about, but started it as a blog just to see if other people were interested in this topic. And me and Mike put on my team just started writing a couple times a week. And it's like, well, if other people start subscribing or reading this, then, maybe there's something to this. But at the time, no one was talking about AI in marketing and sales in 2015, 2016. And so over time, we started getting thousands of subscribers, venture capitalists, entrepreneurs, tech companies, analyst firms, media companies. And it's like, okay, I think the forward-thinking minds in the industry are on the same path. Let's go ahead and do something more with this. And over time, we split it off as its own company, created a conference, and now an online education platform. So that's what the Institute is. It's a media company, an event company, and an education company kind of rolled into one. And we can get a little bit more into that stuff later on. But why don't you tell us a little bit about Drift, Maggie, for those who aren't familiar with Drift?
Yeah, happy to. So Drift is a revenue acceleration platform, and our whole reason for being is we want to speed up the buying process. We pull together both conversational marketing and sales into one solution for go-to-market teams. We really believe that in the sort of new digital era, that buyers have all the choice, buyers are in control. And so revenue teams need to figure out how to work together to deliver really good experiences for buyers. And that's what we're all about. And that's really where we found AI was, how do we make this process better? How do we help companies scale, personalize interactions across all these people that they want to talk to? And so that's really where we started our AI journey.
Yeah, and I think that's, it's again a cool perspective, because what Drift's done is looked at those practical applications and said,
Hmm.
how do we make processes better for our buyers, for our customers? How do we drive efficiencies in the organization? And I know Drift has taken kind of a multi-pronged approach. You've
Yep.
acquired AI companies and talent, but
Yep.
also built from the ground up within, and that's what you
Yeah.
see in a lot of tech companies.
Yeah, I think that's really the magic is, there's a lot of the AI technology or the technology that's underpinning these efforts is open source or openly available.
Yeah.
And so it's really more about how have you applied it and like what special thing have you built on top of that to make it useful for people. So that's really where we focused is, we acquired Giant Otter out of the MIT Media Lab, and then we paired that with our sort of Drift expertise in going to market, and that's how we built the product that we have.
Yeah, and for people who aren't familiar, like, it's early. Like, we'll talk a little
Hmm.
bit about this throughout the findings, but existing tech companies. I mean, Drift has what, 130 or 150 million in funding. I mean, it's major player, and Drift has been working on a roadmap here for years on AI. But many of these big tech companies are really in the early formative stages of integration of AI into their product. And so, as a marketer, just know that as we go through these things, like, you're not behind the curve yet. Like, you're actually still at the forefront. There's lots of opportunity ahead.
Yep.
All right, so this is going to be our agenda. We'll do a quick introduction, kind of a level set on AI. I always like to start off any presentation on just like, let's get on the same page with what we're saying AI is, because there are definitely a lot of different perception. We'll talk a little bit about the report and why we did it. We'll go through kind of the 10 key findings in a nice, concise way. Talk a little bit about how you can identify your own use cases, and then give you a couple of tips to get started. And then just open Q&A. We should have tons of time for that. Use the Q&A panel through Zoom. I think we're all familiar with how Zoom works by now. And chat, our team's there to help. And if you have questions or ideas, go ahead and shoot those in there. So let's go ahead and jump into this introduction to AI, and the question of like, what is artificial intelligence? And I love to get Maggie's perspective on this. This is something I struggled with for years, because I started looking into AI in 2011, and the only definitions you could find were like the textbook geek definitions that I could not comprehend. And so for years, I just dove in and tried to understand all the different perspectives, said, how can I make this make sense to me and then to other marketers who are not machine learning engineers and data scientists and things like that? And so what I ended up finding, my favorite definition, I actually read this in a Rolling Stone article years back, was from Demis Hassabis, the co-founder and CEO of DeepMind, which was acquired by Google years ago. But he defined it as the science of making machines smart. And what I perceived that to mean was a machine, the hardware, the software that you use to do your job, doesn't know anything that it's not coded to know. And then it doesn't get any better unless it's coded to get better. It didn't learn. And so with AI enables, and again, AI is not new. It goes back to the 1950s, but the applications to marketing and sales is new. It means that the machine actually has the ability to learn and do human-like things that it previously wouldn't have had the ability to do out of the box. And so for us, we said, okay, well then, if we think about that applied to marketing, it's this idea of making marketing smart. Because if you think about your job as a marketer, you write all the rules. You tell the machine what to do every day. You come up with the strategy. You set the goals. You write the copy. You define the lists and the campaign strategy. You do all of it. And it often doesn't get smarter or better unless you get smarter or better. But what we're doing now is we're saying, but with machines, we have the ability to enhance what humans are capable of. So Maggie, I mean, what are your thoughts on just kind of that real simple high level overview of AI?
Yeah, I love it. And I think it's really important because I think it's really easy. I'm a quote unquote non-technical product person. I
Mhm.
don't have an engineering or math degree. So I think it's really easy to hear AI and then kind of back away because, you don't feel confident in what it means, what the terms are, and people start throwing around, fancy lingo about stuff. But it's really about understanding what can you do with the data that you have and how can you optimize the different, flows that you're working with. And I think once you get a sense for how you can use it and then everyone is working with basically the same technology and they're just applying it in different ways, I think you can really kind of like open up the space for yourself and figure out how to use it.
Yeah, and so we don't want to bore you or burden you with a bunch of definitions, as Maggie was saying. Like, it can get complicated fast. You don't need to have it get complicated though. So a real simple way we like to think about is just this, the high level AI is a collection of tools and technologies that make machines or marketing smart. So again, you could go search it, you get 20 different definitions, but it's just keep it simple. It's the umbrella term that encapsulates all this other stuff. Machine learning is the primary form of AI that you hear about. And you'll see a bunch of marketing vendors say they use machine learning to do X, Y, and Z, usually related to predicting things. The key here is I always like to equate this to astronomy. What I love about astronomy and space is they have very literal definitions of things. Like a black hole is literally a hole that nothing comes out of, it's black. Machine learning is literally a machine that learns things. As new inputs come in, new data comes in, it actually learns and improves what it does. And it really, most of that is an output that makes a prediction. That's really as simple as it needs to be for most marketers. Then there's a subset of machine learning called deep learning, which is a little more advanced. That's where you'll hear things related to like neural nets. And what they're trying to do is actually teach the machine to think like the human brain. This is how you get vision and language generation and all these human-like abilities, is because they're actually trying to teach it through these nets to function like a human mind would. And beyond this, like, I mean, those are the key terms. Like you can get into all these forms of machine learning, things like that. But if you just have this base level understanding, you're ahead of the vast majority of marketers. Would you agree, Meg? I mean, you talk to a lot of marketers
Yeah.
and you're trying to understand it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say the vast majority of marketers don't even want to get to this level, and would typically bring in a data science professional or someone else on their team to have this kind of conversation. But again, I usually deal with people who are thinking about it like buying a solution, and so I'm often on the other side, which is like, how do I explain to you what we're doing and why it's using AI and why it's real AI, for lack of a better term.
And this is the one other thing we'll show you, just to, again, give you perspective. And I think Maggie has really fascinating insights onto this. But again, for years, I was trying to comprehend myself what it was and what it was capable of, and then find a framework to help other people understand that. And so the way I came up with this framework was actually looking at Amazon and Google and Facebook and IBM and all the big players and saying, well, how are they explaining it? How are they categorizing their solutions? And for a focus on generalities, they basically fall into these buckets. The fourth would be movement, which doesn't really come into play within marketing. But if you think about all the broad ways you can use AI, it can kind of fit into one of these three areas. So language understanding and generation as a primary category, and that could be voice, it could be written, vision. So you can think about like the automatic recommendation or recognition and tagging of images in an e-commerce store. That's an example of that. Or if you go in your iPhone and you search for tree, how it automatically finds every photo you've ever taken that has a tree in it. Like that's vision. And then prediction has all kinds of examples. So you can actually go through each of these applications and you can start to think like, what are the ways I could use this? Like Maggie was talking about Gong as we were like coming into the webinar today. That's an example where an application of kind of analysis is being used, but Drift is using natural language processing to understand language, natural language generation to generate language. So why don't you talk a little bit about your thoughts on this framework, Maggie? And while you're doing that, I'm going to put up a poll and see what people feel about which areas they might be most interested in.
Yeah, I think the thing I wanted to call out here is that it's, again, I think, like we mentioned on the previous slide, it's easy to get sort of turned off by how technical it is or how technical you think you have to be to understand these different buckets. But I do think it's important as a marketer to understand like at least this level, because what you need to understand is what you can apply AI to. And so I think it's really easy to say AI is this cool thing, we all want to use it, but why? What problem do you think you can solve? And it's going to be hard to figure out what problems you can solve without understanding the different sort of buckets that you can use AI in. And so I would suggest that at least this level of understanding is enough for you to be way ahead of the game and to have a good conversation with different vendors about like what you can do with AI.
I'm going to go ahead and this was not a question we asked in the survey. So I was kind of fascinated to this because we didn't even really get into this. So we have 70% answered prediction, 40% language, and 19% vision. That kind of jives. I mean, vision is a hard one. It's abstract. Like as a marketer to think about, well, how would I use vision? I'm not sure about that. But if you're in content marketing, which a lot of our people are, they generate content in some form, you're going to understand language. But prediction, I'm glad people make that connection. That is really the primary use case for AI in a lot of marketing instances. Anything surprise you there, Maggie?
No, I think it makes sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
I would say prediction is the most natural extension of the a lot of the tools that already exist in the market to optimize different flows. And I think there's lots to be done in language, but I would say the language technologies are a little earlier. Like
Yep.
the where we work and Drift is primarily in the language side, and a lot of what we're doing is pretty cutting edge. So does that make sense?
Cool. All right. So let's talk about at a high level. And this is a real key takeaway for both Meg and I. Like we talked about these findings ahead of time. And what we want people to realize is there's all these applications of AI, there's all these use cases. But at the end of the day, there's really two primary reasons you should be looking at AI. You don't need AI for AI's sake because it's the fancy buzzword. You need it because it's either going to reduce costs, drive efficiency by intelligent automating data-driven repetitive tasks, or it's going to accelerate revenue, oftentimes by improving your ability to make predictions or drive efficiency in tasks. So those are really the two core reasons. So you're looking to solve business problems that you can predict a value to make bringing AI in, or you're trying to take tasks to make them, better. And so Maggie, you see both of these all the time. Like, what are your thoughts from Drift's perspective on those outcomes?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand. I think where I always want to start, like you mentioned, is what's the biggest opportunity for your business, and like where are you looking to go? And the conversation I always try to have with customers and the users of our products are, what's your goal this quarter, this year? Like what does that look like for you? And then let's figure out what we can do to support that. Because then you prevent AI for AI's sake and just using a tool because you think it's cool. And a lot of the technology you can kind of use in both ways, right? Like anything that's going to help you be more efficient might save you time, which might get you revenue faster.
Right.
So it's not always as clean cut as this, but I think being clear about which one your business is in and which one is higher priority is super critical.
Yeah, and I think related to that, and the URLs here, and Mike on our team will drop this in. If you have not seen the report yet, Drift has a great user interface on their version where you can actually go see the whole report, and then you can choose to download a PDF version if you want. But that URL will take you right to that version. But the premise was, when we set out to do this is something I've been thinking about doing for years, because we would try and say, like, where really is the industry in terms of understanding and adoption? I would see these reports from McKinsey and PwC and Deloitte, and they're just incredible reports. But it was like, it wasn't aligning with what I was hearing. Like, I've been on the road doing over 100 talks on AI, and I get all these questions that are so beginner level. Like, it's the first time they're hearing about it, or they're so afraid it's going to take their job. It's so abstract. And so for me, I just didn't feel like we were getting a true sense of where the industry really was. And yet all these reports are saying trillions of dollars of annual impact. And so what we set out to do with this report was say, where really are we in understanding and adoption of AI? And do people realize the possibility to make their marketing smarter? Or Meg, I think, as you've said, make them smarter, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not just about the marketing.
Yeah, I think it's really about what can you offload to this technology that's going to make you more efficient, because I think back to that, there's so much science fiction out there about what AI is and what it can do. And like you mentioned earlier, it's not necessarily going to create the creative,
Right.
right? Yet, maybe one day, but really it's just going to make you more efficient and help you as a marketer focus on the stuff that is more like challenging and interesting for a human to work on. Like what's the right creative, what's the right brand voice, and all that kind of stuff. And so I really think about it as making the people smarter and more efficient.
Yeah, we talk a lot about what remains uniquely human. I get asked that question, like, what am I going to be doing in
Right.
in 5 years? So yeah, and we deal with some of that within this. So quick overview. So what we did is we have a tool called AI Score for Marketers, which again, we'll throw that link in there. And it's a free assessment that we created back in 2018 that lets people go through and identify use cases and prioritize them by rating them. It's just a free tool. It's ungated even. You don't have to give your contact info. So what we talked about with Drift is like, what if we use this to not only do a survey with 13 questions to find out how individuals thought about AI and how their organizations did, but what if we also had them rate all these use cases, and we could come out with an understanding of what people would value intelligent automation. And so it ended up working. And we had I think there's some survey response we have over 430 responses for. So a nice sample size there. And then 235 respondents went through the entire thing, which honestly takes like 7 to 10 minutes. It was a big lift for people to go through that. But at the end, they actually get to see all the top use cases that they rate, and we'll show you those. But that's how we did it. And so over about a 2.5 month period, we had people go through that and take those responses. And so what we're going to do now is give you a little background on who these people were, kind of a sample of that. But we're going to dive into the key findings pretty quickly too. So at a high level, 57% were director level and above, which is really key, because what we want to do is look at the decision makers. And actually 32% said they were the decision makers on buying AI tech or marketing tech. Another 25% were influencers. So these are people who have the influence or the buying power to actually purchase smarter technology. We asked about areas of marketing that are involved, and you could do multiple choice. Content marketing was number one at 69%. Analytics was right behind at 60%. Email marketing at 58%. Social at 54%. So a lot of people were involved in multiple areas. But that, just so when you understand, when we get to talk about use cases, remember, the ratings are subjective to what you do, because we ask people, what would be the value for you or your team? So if they're involved in content marketing, it's natural that those content marketing use cases are going to be rated higher, just as an example. And then heavy B2B, we ask B2B versus B2C. So people who are B2B and B2C was also a good contingent of that. A lot of small businesses at 67% with 10 million or less in revenue, but there was 22% who had 50 million or more in revenue. So there's actually a decent mix of perspectives, but I think if you asked only enterprises, you may see some of this data move a little bit higher in terms of how advanced their capabilities were or what they're piloting. And then North America accounted for about half, 48%, but there was 43 countries, people from 43 countries took it. So again, just kind of a sense of where we're at in terms of the demographics of the audience. So with that, let's just kind of get right into it. What we wanted to do, we didn't set out with a narrative in mind. I mean, honestly, like it really was, let's just see understanding and adoption. But once we had all the findings, we kind of stepped back and said, what is this telling us? And what we started with is, do they understand the importance of AI? So the question here was, how important is AI to the success of your marketing over the next 12 months? So we didn't want a long-term time frame. We wanted to say, do they understand what it can do? And 52% said very important or critically important. And so that told us, it's like, okay, the majority understand that this is an immediate opportunity. Are you hearing that when you talk to customers, Maggie, that they get like, okay, I need smarter solutions now. I can be more
Definitely.
efficient.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been a wild year. And I think a lot of people are looking for where they can get more efficient, how they can improve what they're doing. And there's definitely a hunger for this in the market. But again, pair that with, people not feeling confident in what it is and how to use it. So it's a really interesting time in the market, because it's like everyone wants it. They know there's value, but there's the then what is where it gets tricky.
Yeah, they're not really sure what exactly it is, as you
Right.
said, which I
Yeah.
think is good. So the second, and this is a two-part question. So I'll unpack what we're looking at here. So the first question we said is, what percentage of marketing tasks that your team performs are intelligently automated to some degree? Not AI is doing the thing for you completely, but it's making you better at that thing today. And then we classified that by saying, what we mean is AI is applied to improve efficiency and or performance of the task. And so that's the first question. And so on the left bar chart, what you're seeing is 17% of marketers said that they are intelligently automating a quarter or more of their tasks. But then we asked, how about in 5 years? How many tasks do you think will be intelligently automated to some degree in 5 years? 80% said that they think 26% or a quarter or more of what they're doing will be intelligently automated to some degree. And 43% said they think at least half of the tasks they do every day will be intelligently automated to some degree. What are your thoughts, Meg? Because I kept saying, like, I've been saying for years, 80%, that in 3 to 5 years, at least 80% of what we do will have AI in some way involved in what it does.
I certainly this could be possible, but what I'm excited about is that hopefully my hope is that I would rather have fewer things, but automated better. I think it's really easy to bring AI into a company and only get so far, and it's kind of hard and it takes some time to do all the training. So I would rather see, really tight use cases, really well automated, driving a ton of value for marketers rather than, wasting too much time getting into too many different solutions.
Mhm.
And I also get excited about, okay, assuming that we're able to do this and we can automate all these tasks, how much time does that give you back? And like, what do you get to focus on now that you don't have to do whatever it is that we're automating? And
Yep.
I think that's really the exciting part to me, is not just that you're using AI, but then like, what does that unlock for you as a marketer?
Yeah, I think one of the ways I come at it is when I think about that 80%. And again, I own an agency and I own the Institute, and I look at the things we do.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a line I used in the opening letter to the report that says, your life is AI assisted and your marketing will be too.
Yep.
The way I think about marketing software in the future is, if in 5 years it's AI isn't fully infused into all areas it could be within a product you're buying, then there's a good chance that that tech company has fallen behind its competitors.
Mm-hmm.
That, how you and I use Spotify or Netflix or Google Maps or Gmail or Siri or Alexa, like all these things we use every day as consumers, that we never stop and think about, man, thank goodness for machine learning. Like, it just routed me around that accident. I feel
Mm-hmm.
like that's what marketing software has to be like in 5 years, that it's so ingrained in everything you're using that you don't even notice the AI.
Yeah. Yeah. And my hope is also that it relieves some of the obsessive optimizations that we have to do,
Yeah.
and like all the time spent like tweaking knobs on tools. Hopefully we can automate that away and make things just work.
So then another question we asked is, which stage of marketing AI transformation best describes your marketing team? Now, we created this framework based on a consulting gig I was doing a couple of years ago, where I was trying to help a big organization understand, you don't just go buy 5 AI tools and everything's good, like you just all have efficiency. As you start stacking pilot use case on top of pilot use case, you start transforming the way your organization runs. You start changing the skill levels needed for your team. You start potentially scaring your team that you're automating them out of jobs. So realistically, as you really start scaling up the use of AI, you have to be looking at the implications across your team and your organization. And so we created this kind of 5 stages framework to think about this, where researching is, you're becoming aware of it and you're starting to look at what it can do. Understanding is, you're learning how it works and exploring use cases and technologies. Piloting is, you're finding those quick win pilot projects to activate within the organization to prove AI can work. Scaling is, you're all in. You are just literally looking at every inefficiency in the organization, every business problem differently. You're finding smarter solutions. Humanizing is, you're taking the gains from AI and becoming a better brand, becoming a better employer, becoming a better marketer, because you're finding the ways to reallocate that time to being a better company. And so that's kind of the framework here. And so just at a high level, you can see most people are just getting started. 34% say they're piloting in some way, only 17% scaling. I'm actually surprised by that number. I'd like to know who those companies are, because we have a really hard time finding brands that are doing this. If you are, I would love to hear from you for a book we're writing. What's your perception, Maggie? Again, you talk to these people all the time. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, I also think it's important to remember, like, the job of a marketer is not to bring AI tools to their business, right? So anyone I'm talking to is trying to drive leads, right? So that's the job that they're there to do. They're like, trying to grow their customer base. And so any time spent doing this is sort of extra time. And so what I think about is, like, it makes sense that people are researching, because it's really hard to understand, like we've already talked about, what is available, what the technology is, how it works. And so I could easily see how you only have a certain amount of time. You need to go out there, try to figure out what's available, and you get stuck in the research phase because it's so hard to move past it. I think
Yeah.
that's why having conversations like this is important, because it should help you understand what are the use cases, help you get past the research phase to figure out maybe what would work for your company. Like, what could you pilot based on the problems that you have?
And I think the opportunity, and I don't know if you agree here, is there's so few marketers who have a competency and a confidence to talk about AI and to know to look for smarter solutions, that even in massive enterprises, you can be the one that
Mhm.
actually leads this conversation. It may not be your role today, but people need to take the initiative to say, hey, we're spending 100 hours a month and $2,000 a month on the software to do this thing that I'm pretty sure we could automate that with AI. and save 90 hours a month of resources. Like, there aren't enough marketers that know to think about things that way right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I build an AI product and even I sometimes am a little scared to talk about it. So I totally get that.
All right. So then this is another slide that kind of mashes up two questions, two findings. So the first we asked is, which is a higher priority for your team moving forward? Not like, what are you doing right now, but what's a higher priority for your team? Accelerating revenue or reducing costs, or you could say both. And so in this case, it was 89% said either revenue acceleration or both. So when you combine those two, only 8% said cost reduction is, the main priority. And that, I mean, again, it makes sense. There's nothing to me that's kind of earth shattering there. But then we asked, what outcomes is your team achieving with AI today? So this question obviously assumes that, someone is using AI or knows they're using AI. And what we found there is 41%. We gave them, I think, 10 choices. So there's accelerating revenue growth, getting more actionable insights, creating personalized experiences, reducing time spent on tasks, greater ROI, like collection of things. And so the top was accelerating revenue, 41%, and the second was getting actual insights from their marketing data. So again, like, nothing terribly surprising for me here. What actually was surprising is that 41% said they were getting outcomes from AI. That was the part that I was kind of surprised about, because none of the above, I think, was 30% of people. So 30% said I'm not getting any value from AI today.
Yeah, it doesn't really surprise me either. I think there's also a ton of tools to help optimize, A/B tests and things like that. So hopefully people are sort of dipping their toes in the water with those tools before they get into the more deeper, more complex AI, like the virtual selling assistants that we have.
And you've got an example with Octave, how
Yeah.
they're doing the acceleration round. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think Okta is an amazing business, and they came to us, with a challenge. They were trying to scale up their go-to-market team, and just to get really tactical, like tons of site visitors, lots of different products, a complex product, lots of different people trying to talk to them, and part of their challenge was, having all those people over the map. They wanted to scale their team. It didn't really make sense to just grow their SDR team exponentially to handle like all this volume. And so that's where we brought in our virtual selling assistant to help them sift through that traffic and really identify the right leads and get them to the right place. And it had a huge impact, obviously, on their pipeline, on improving conversions to sales qualified leads. And it turned into this really amazing channel for them. And a lot of that was because what we did was they had all this data, they had all these people who they wanted to talk to, and we could use that to train our tool up and help them so that they could just say, this is the business problem we have, and we can go solve that with AI and come back and just deliver leads.
Yeah, I love that line. This is the business problem we have.
Yeah.
Because, we'll talk again at the getting started side of the webinar at the end, but that is so critical. It's either use case driven, or it's what is a problem we can solve in a smarter way. And I think that's what, and here's a quote from David from Okta.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the interesting thing is I think it can be, like you mentioned earlier, a little scary to give up some of the control that you might have over a typical tool to use something like AI. But the long and short of it is that it allows you to process more things faster. And maybe there's some stuff you could do in-house, but working with a team who knows how to use this technology and can apply it and who already has all the systems and the technology means we can do it faster, right? So they could come to us and say, like, this is what people, like, we've had chat, how do we take this to the next level? And that allowed us to train a bot that can respond for them and qualify leads and do that all 24/7 without having to invest a ton of time.
That's cool. So then the next one was, do they get it? Like, again, this is such a fundamental question. You can see, like I mentioned earlier, like there's some larger sample size. This is 426 marketers answered this question. So the question was, how would you classify your understanding? It's the same one we asked in the poll. And so you can see 50% beginner, 30% intermediate, which actually jives roughly with the people on this call. We had 54% beginner and 44% intermediate. My feeling on this is I think the intermediate people may be very aggressive in their perception of their comfort level with AI. I don't know. Again, having just talked with people, I just get the feeling that we're not there. And if the litmus test was, give me without looking it up, give me a really approachable definition of AI, and not taking the one we just said at the beginning of this, but like, you need to go in right now and explain to the CMO what AI is. You don't have a minute to research this. Go explain it and why she should care and what we should do next. Like, if that was intermediate level, I don't know that we're there. So again, we didn't classify what is beginner intermediate, but this is where we're at. The majority, or at least half, say they're beginner level. I mean, you talk to them all the time. Like, do you think we're at the beginner level as an industry?
I would say, yeah. Again, it really depends. I think it depends on the type of company. It depends on your company's sort of culture and whether you're one of those teams that is always trying to try the new thing and like loves the ambiguity of trying new tools, or if your company is a little bit more conservative. Working with fast growing startups, typically way more confident with this type of thing versus maybe in a more a company that's been around for longer. So it really, I've really seen it depend on the team, the culture of the team, how long the team has been around. And then I also think there's a pretty big difference, and maybe we'll get this when we talk about
Mm,
barriers, but a big difference between, a CMO saying, I've seen all these reports. I really want to see how we can leverage AI, and maybe a manager of demand gen or a director of marketing who has to actually implement it. And those two people often have a very different view of the technology and what they should do. And that's where I see the friction more is in like, love the idea, super bought in. Okay, now I have to go do it. That's where it gets challenging.
right. Make the business case and find
Right.
the tech. Yep. So then that kind of goes into your confidence level buying the tech. And so we asked the
Hmm.
question, how would you rank your confidence evaluating AI powered technology? So, I mean, there's some like high, very high, like that's good, 31%, but low, medium, and none makes up the vast majority at 69%. And again, that's what I see. We get asked the very basic questions about AI tech because, again, all these vendors are saying we use AI for this or machine learning for that or deep learning for this. And like, you don't know what that means, and do you know to ask the right questions to drill into the thing that actually matters, because you don't actually care that they're using machine learning. You care that it makes the thing you do better and smarter, and it continually gets better. So yeah, I mean, there's just a disconnect in the market, though. And the other thing we found is we talk to a lot of these AI powered companies. Their marketing and sales people can't explain AI. And so,
Yeah.
like, you're buying from someone who, when you ask a hard question, it's like, well, how does it actually learn? Or, like, where is the data set coming from that enables it to make these predictions? It's like, let me go get the machine learning team or the data scientists on the call and they can explain it. You're like, no, I don't want to hear it from them. It's not going to make sense.
Well, and also you kind of alluded to this, but who cares?
Yeah.
Like I think it's sometimes companies, and I've definitely fallen victim to this. I want to tell you about this really cool thing. Like I want to tell you about the patent we have, but it doesn't matter. Like the fact that I have not me personally, but our team has a patent on our technology doesn't mean anything to your business outcome. And so that's why I would hope that everyone would feel confident in saying that's nice, but what do I get for it? Like,
Right.
what is this going to give to me? And like having those questions are the ones that I think we should be learning to ask, because that's what's going to get the best outcomes for us, regardless of the technology we're using.
Yeah, and the challenge is when you're evaluating side by side a tool, because at the end of the day, you're just buying marketing technology. You're
Right.
buying smarter marketing tech. But if you're buying a new email solution or a new CRM or a new conversational agent, the ones that have real AI in them are going to be better. The ones that have a roadmap and a public point of view and a team that's
Hmm.
constantly making the product smarter. So that's the challenge. It's like, yeah, it doesn't necessarily matter, but it actually does when you drill in and you're trying to evaluate three products side by side and saying, which one should I bet on to make me a better marketer over the next 5 years? You want the one that has real AI in it.
Oh yeah. Yes, that's absolutely true. I think, and back to the earlier point you made about the different buckets of AI,
Mhm.
giving getting enough knowledge to ask those questions is how you're going to be able to tell if it's real or not. Like
Yeah.
I think once you can go a couple of steps deeper and ask, okay, cool, you have AI, is it language? Like what kind of NLP are you using? Like what systems are you building on top of? Like that'll really clarify if a team knows what they're doing like pretty quickly.
Yeah, and again, most marketers don't know to ask that stuff. So don't be overwhelmed. Like, oh my gosh, I'm so many years behind. It's like, no, this is the opportunity. Be the one that can actually ask those questions, and you're going to stand out on your team and advance yourself. And that kind of leads us to the second to last finding here is um, there are some serious barriers to adoption here. I honestly, going into this, thought fear was a way bigger factor, but it was very low, 16%. I thought people were just afraid of it. I thought it was too abstract. I thought they felt like they were going to lose their jobs. And the data doesn't say that. It says, like, no, we just don't have the education. We don't have the training for it. And that's kind of encouraging to me because that's solvable. Like that's
Mhm.
not a high barrier to overcome. Just being on this webinar is a starting point for a lot of people. Did anything jump out to you when you saw this, Maggie?
Yeah, it actually really matches what I've seen over the past couple of years because to get really tactical, I think one of the big challenges when a company buys something that uses AI is that all of the ways that you're used to working with a solution, being able to say like, oh, I'm going to set it up. I'm going to build my workflow. I can see exactly what's going to happen. I'm in control of it. I can test it before it goes live. Like that workflow is very different for a nonlinear system. So for example, using our product, nothing that the bot says is something that we haven't written by hand. So it's not creating language, but it responds to the buyer. So depending on what questions you ask, it'll say different things. And the order in which it'll say questions depends entirely on the person who's talking to it. So it's never the same. And so you can't have that like 100% confidence with what it's going to do, which is just a different mindset. And so it's stuff like that shows up that I think highlights how not having the training and education and grounding in the concepts makes it a little trickier and a little scarier, I think, for some companies to start using it.
Yeah, and I saw a question in the chat. The question here was, which of the following do you consider barriers to adoption of AI in your marketing? And you could choose multiple. So 70% of people said lack of education and training.
Yeah.
And,
And
and go ahead.
one thing I want to add to that, I think,
Yeah.
is like there's also a point that in technology like AI, the first interaction is really important because you have to build trust that it's going to do what you think it's going to do. And one of the big things I've learned working with in this space is that I have to get it right when you first go live, and you have to have good interactions with the tool, and then you start to trust it. Whereas, if you've built a workflow, you don't have to trust it. You've seen what it does.
Right.
And so I think that's also something that I see a lot that doesn't really show up here.
It's a great point. And honestly, one I've come up against a lot is a common starter pilot project is lead scoring,
Hmm.
applying machine learning to do lead scoring. And I'll often hear, yeah, the sales team thought it was terrible. Like they felt
Right.
they were better at predicting a lead. So they just stopped using it after 2 days. It's like,
Right.
because
You
people
mess up
don't,
those first two leads, and
yeah, it's like you just lost the faith of that sales. And that's a
yeah.
lack of education internally that's causing that, because what they didn't understand is how machine learning works, which is human training. There's constant inputs, constant human oversight, constant tweaking of the model to make the predictions better. And so again, it's this misunderstanding in the industry of what AI is. It's not a magic switch. You don't just like go buy an AI product and all of a sudden it's like, oh, cool, like we're done. It's like, no, there's training, there's onboarding, there's evolution of what your team's responsible for.
Hmm.
It's not like that. It's unfortunately, it's not the magic switch.
Maybe one day I'll get
Yeah.
there.
So, the main takeaway though is like, when you look at this, again, we start off with saying, you write all the rules now. You create all the branching logic. And where Drift has evolved is not that every conversation has this distinct branching logic based on, if they say this, do this. No, the machine has training, it has words, it has potential paths, but it actually figures out what to say and when and how to evolve. And that's real tech, and it's here now. And there are hundreds of companies that are building individual narrow tools for narrow use cases to make marketing smarter now. The problem is not enough marketers are seeking those things out. And that's kind of like the key takeaway is like, we're there in terms of entering that age of intelligent automation. It's possible now. We just need more marketers that are seeking it out. And then I know we're coming, I want to make sure we leave plenty of time for questions here. So we'll just go through real quick the use cases. If you haven't looked at the report yet, there's an entire section that actually shows the ratings for those 49 use cases we talked about. But I think it's really important, since this can be a starting point for people. What is a use case? Like, how do you know if you have a use case? There's 3 criteria we look at. It can be data-driven, it can be repetitive or process-driven, or it can be making a prediction, or it can be all 3 of those things. Like, it doesn't have to be one or the other. But if you have something that fits that criteria, you may have a viable use case for AI. And so again, when we asked across 49 sample use cases and people could rate from 0 to 5 how they would rate it, and basically it's 1 is no value, 5 is this would transform my life if AI could help me with this task. These are the top 10. So here's the first 5: recommending highly targeted content. Think of that as like Netflix for your website. Rather than you saying, hey, they downloaded this ebook and looked at these 5 pages, now show them this. The machine constantly learns and individualizes those recommendations. Spotify, Netflix, they're all using that model. Amazon uses it for product predictions. audience targeting, measuring ROI, insights into top performing content, like the machine generating narratives, finding anomalies, recommending actions, like that's huge. And then the creation of data-driven content, teaching the machine to write it, teaching it to look at narratives or look at charts and create narratives. So like an example here would be Tableau has an integration with narrative science. And as you're moving through your BI tool and looking at different charts, there's actually human sounding narrative of what those charts are saying right next side by side. That's an example of data-driven content, being turned into narratives. And then the next ones would be winning creative. I mentioned to Maggie as we were kind of coming into this, Pattern 89 is a tool we use to do that. Forecasting campaign results. That's a huge one for me. It's like, what if you're about to launch this next big campaign and you could actually run models to tell you how many leads you're actually going to get? Not you guessing, like, let's just get 500. It's like, no, how many can we get? Like, what does the model say we can get? Content experiences, keywords and topic clusters, and website content. So anything jump out at you there, Maggie, like as awesome use cases that you've thought about?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are all really good ones. Again, like my advice would be, pick somewhere to start. I think
Yeah,
from my perspective, where people run into trouble is amazing. I'm super excited about AI. I'm going to apply it to everything. And then you don't really make progress. And so I think it's more like, because it's so flexible and you can solve so many problems, it's really, again, like, what is the business problem? What's most important for you? Where do you want to start? And the better you can focus in on that, like the faster you're going to get those results. But I think these are a great way to contextualize, like, what is AI? Where can I
right,
apply it? Because it's one thing to say, do you have data? Is it repetitive? And then you pair that with, oh, forecasting campaign results. Like,
right.
actually, yeah, I have a use case where I could use that.
Yeah, we've always found use cases makes it more tangible.
Yeah.
And I'm with you. Like the way to do it is pick one. Like pick
Mhm.
the thing, like think of literally give yourself a spreadsheet, make a list of all the things you do, put an hours per month column, put a cost column, are you using software to do it? And then put a value to intelligently automate and like sort it and pick the highest one in descending order and just start there. So, and that's kind of, a way to wrap is just how do you get started? One way is talk to your core tech stack. If you're with Drift and you're not using the AI functionality, talk to Drift. Say, are there smarter features within the product that we're not using? Can we get more efficiency and value out of the product? So go talk to your CRM, your marketing automation, your conversational tools, like find those companies. But then you need to like understand what it's really capable of. And we have whole classes on this stuff, like how to talk to vendors, but just to give you a sense of some of the questions that you might be asking that are going to be a little different than you would ask in a standard buying process. And you guide people on this stuff, Maggie, right? Like when you're talking to customers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, customers are coming to me hopefully with these questions. I love it when customers have more detailed, specific questions about what our technology is. And the way we approach it is really, help us understand, again, like I've said, I sound like a broken record. What's your use case? Like, what's your business problem?
Right.
But for us, it's also like, what kinds of like a question I would ask a potential customer is, what kind of data do you have? Is it available to us? How much do you have? Our technology runs on conversations. Do you have conversation data? Can we get access to it? That's going to have a big impact on how quickly we can drive value for you. And I think it's just having a conversation about what you're looking to do and what we can help with is really interesting. And I love the questions about, product roadmap. We have the same types of questions internally, right? It's like, we could do anything with AI. Where do we want to focus it first?
Right.
And we love talking through that.
And I think a recurring theme you and I have both been hitting on is at the end of the day, you don't need AI. You need smarter tools to help you achieve business goals.
Mm-hmm.
And so we often will bucket that into either an efficiency lift, like you're reducing time and money spent on something, or a performance lift, which often is acceleration of revenue. And any tool you would look at, AI or not AI, like it really should do one or both of those things for you. And so just always keep that in mind as you kind of go down this path. And then the last thing, and Maggie and I talked about this again, like before we were coming into the actual webinar, is just you don't need a bunch of sophisticated things. Like you don't have to go from 0 to 100. You can get a lot of value out of a simple AI tool. And so just keep that in mind. Again, it's like we're not trying to completely transform your marketing. We're trying to get you to start and then just keep taking those small steps. And then we'll just wrap here again with the URL. If you haven't downloaded the report or checked it out, you can go to Drift's site and again, see the whole report there. And then, In terms of the education, like this is kind of what we do at the Institute. We've built an entire online academy there's 30 plus instructors, 5 certifications, a private community, and it's all around trying to build this community of people who are trying to figure this out and trying to help people identify use cases, pilot it, scale within the organization. So if you're at that stage where you're just ready to go, then I would say check this out. It's just marketingacademy.ai. Other than that, like we're going to be building more of the open community to really try and create the movement around this and find those other people that are like you that are trying to solve for this. And so with that, we're just going to go to open Q&A, and I see there's a lot of Q&A happening over here in chat. So I'm just going to scan over here. How can I help with lead generation? That's a good one. I mean, there's so many ways. You could do it from predictive scoring of leads to helping you figure out what content to create. Anything jump out to you, Maggie, on lead generation? Or even, I
Yeah.
mean, that's conversational. You're doing it with
Yeah.
conversational.
Yeah, I have a tool for you. No, I think the way I think about lead generation is, there's all sorts of different challenges you might be running into. Like, do you not even have enough to start with? Is your team spending a ton of time trying to qualify the right leads and wasting time there? There's different buckets of problem you might have. And so I would think more about like, which one are you fall in? Let's say you're getting tons of site traffic and you want to sift through that more efficiently. Like that's a problem that we're able to solve. So I think it just depends on like which part of the lead funnel you're looking at, and there's different tools and solutions you can have to attack different parts of that funnel.
There's another one about can we get concrete knowledge sharing? So I'm not sure exactly the question, but the knowledge assistant is a good one. So we use a tool called phrase.io that actually like learns from the content on your site and then tries to answer questions. But I assume Drift is actually probably doing some in that area, or thinking about knowledge management and being able to use the corpus of knowledge that exists maybe on a domain to answer questions or to inform paths you may take down. Is that fair?
Yeah. Yeah, the way we think about it, again, our specialty is conversational AI, and so we have some patented technology to help us understand and make that useful to people. And the way we think about that is the data set that we would train on would include that content. So we
Okay.
look at what conversations have you had, what content do you have, and we try to roll that all together to power our virtual assistant to respond appropriately.
Okay. Got one. This is always a popular one in terms of cost. Can small businesses use AI tech? Is it very expensive at the moment, more accessible for big companies? So my perspective there is so again, the way you have to think about it is AI has to be trained to do a very specific task. It's not like you just go buy a platform that just does AI for everything. So it's trained to write email subject lines, or it's trained to assess ad copy, or it's trained to manage ad budget. Like it's trained to do these things. And because of that, you can actually get quite affordable tech in a SaaS model where you're just paying a monthly fee. And oftentimes what can happen is it's trained initially on anonymized data from the entire client portfolio from that SaaS company. So you may not even need a ton of your own data to start realizing value. So I would say, yes, there are lots of tools that are priced for small businesses to see immediate value. What are you seeing in the market there, Maggie?
Yeah, I would agree. I think it depends on also how much work you're willing to put in. I think a lot of times where the cost comes in is having someone else do a lot of the training or do a lot of the setup or a more complex engagement. So if your use case is relatively constrained and you have a good data set and it's not super specific to your business and it's something that other companies might have a similar problem to, that might be something that there's an entry level option. And again, I think there's different service tiers that might make something more or less expensive too.
Another one is we've got, what's your opinion on creating a recommendation system for generating media plans? Absolutely. There's tools out there. So we use WordStream. It doesn't generate the plan itself, in terms of paid media spend, but it monitors what's happening and it actually recommends ways to improve. So it takes that lift off of our team of rather than having to dig in and find the anomalies and the insights. It does that. And then the marketer is kind of the oversight and says, that makes sense, that doesn't make sense. You could also use a tool like Albert, which actually manages the media spend for you. You tell it what you want to spend and your goals, and it actually moves everything around for you. Are you providing any courses regarding AI marketing? Yeah, again, not the shameless plug, but marketingacademy.ai. That's what we built that for. Predict open rates with specific subject lines. Yep. Yeah, that's so Phrasee would be one that does that. And that's Phrasee. That's their product. It actually will predict and it'll write the subject lines and then predict which one will work best. Have you used any AI tools on the email side, Maggie? Anything you're familiar with?
I'm sure we have. I
Yeah.
am not the email expert.
Okay. Yeah, there's language generation is going to explode. So there are
Yeah.
tons of tools emerging to do language generation for ads, for emails, for sales. Like it's just that's the thing you're going to see so many companies in the next 2 years emerge to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you recommend to get a certification in AI in order to help our small business clients or just learning with the webinars? The webinars, we designed it to make the webinars free to introduce people to it. And basically when people are ready to go to that next level, that's what we built our academy for. Drift has education around specific, tools and use case. Like you can get certified in conversational AI with Drift.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think it's just where you're at in your career and like what you want to take it to the next level. But as Maggie said earlier, like there's so many opportunities if you understand the basic technical functions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I think the certification comes into play. Would you agree?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there are, again, this is my background in product showing up, but I would also, there's probably a data scientist at your company, like go chat with them. I'm
Mhm.
sure they would be willing to spend 10 minutes just giving you a download. I mean, I do that all the time with our data science team. They're coming out with some crazy technology and I'm just like, can you give me the second grader version of this and just walk me through it? And they're always happy to do it. So
Make it make sense to me.
yeah, and I think but you have to be confident enough to ask those questions, right? Because that's how you're going to get the answer you want. So I would don't discount the team around you. I'm sure there's people that can help.
Sometimes my 9-year-old daughter will ask me like what I'm doing with AI and trying to
Hmm.
understand it. And so I practice by trying to make it make sense to her. And so like
Perfect.
if she understands an answer, then it's like, okay, good. I hit on that. I'll use that on stage next time. Um, All right, we've got, let's see, predictive. Do you see pushback from owners, executive management about it conflicting with their view of delivering personal service? Well, that's a great question from
Yeah,
Kristen.
yeah. This is a really good one. So I would say the challenge that I really see with that business is having is a trend that's coming from consumer, which is people expect you to provide them with a very specific experience that's tailored to them.
Yep.
So I expect a level of service as a consumer that is all about me. And I don't want to wait. I'm not going to wait for a phone call. I'm going to text, message, or email. And so that sort of ethos is moving over into B2B. And so I would say the risk is more not using a technology that can at least start to provide a personalized experience at scale and forcing customers who are used to like text-based communication to fill out forms and wait. So
Yep.
I think the risk is on the other side, which is not providing a good experience and risking, not being responsive to your customers.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. I think convenience and personalization are two of the primary purposes of all the AI we're doing.
Yep.
And I have this belief that we can actually become more human as a result of this. By that, I mean, focus on the things the machine doesn't know, creativity, empathy, like think about the people on the other end, and you're freed up to do that because you don't have
Hmm.
to do all the repetitive tasks anymore.
Yeah.
All right, let me see if I got one more and then we'll kind of wrap here. What is the risk of getting, okay, the tech is evolving rapidly. What is the risk of getting locked into some technology platform that is not keeping up with innovation? That's a good question. How do you think about that from a product side?
Yeah, I mean, I would say this is the challenge that I have for myself, which is I don't ever want to be the team that's not providing you with that, cutting edge experience. But it's an interesting challenge, which is, how do you bring this stuff to market? How do you make sure that you're keeping up, making room for your data scientists and linguists and stuff to be shipping new things? Um, but I would say there's going to be an explosion in the space like we've been talking about.
Yeah.
So
Well, this has been awesome. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate Drift partnering with us to do this report. And thanks to, the 550 plus people who actually, registered, and many of them joined us today. So just thank you. I hope you take the next step, continue the conversation, keep doing what you're doing, and keep moving it forward. So Maggie, thank you again for all
thank
your
you.
time.
Yeah, this was
All right.
great. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Thanks, everybody.